This is the Stevens Aeromodel 1/12 scale micro cap 232, designed by Bill Stevens in 2002, and we picked one up right away when he came out with it. And my son Zach framed this, covered it, hinged the control surfaces, and it has sat since then. It's a gorgeous little scale rendition of the Cap 232 laser cut kit, all balsa wood. So I have recently finished the model, and what got me going on it was the micro RC equipment that's available today. The micro brick receiver made by Crossover. This is a 5-channel receiver with onboard 1S 5 amp ESC and 2 digital linear servos. So that goes a long ways to eliminating the weight of wires and plugs. I also have their separate digital linear servos. So I have them in the model for the ailerons. And I'm running a Hyperion 1S LiPo, 200 milliamp hour, 50C discharge. So that's some pretty impressive micro electronic components. I purchased all these components off of eBay, a place called Buzzard Models. They carry all of Crossover's micro electronics. So let's take a little closer look at this plane. Show you some of the things I fabricated for it. Take a look at inside it, how everything's mounted, and some of the ideas that I incorporated into the build, like magnetic canopy. Well, I'll take it apart, take the cowling off, wing off, and we'll look at these micro RC components that are in the model. My son Zach was 13 years old at the time he built this model. He also cut out and glued together the ABS cowling. I did a little filling on it and painted it. Did the blue coloring on the bottom to match up with the color he had on the bottom. The other thing he did, I failed to mention, is he had the control horns glued in on the rudder and the elevator. So says something about laser cut kits. 13 years old, he framed this, did all that assembly that I said, and I stayed true to his covering. I tightened up the covering with an iron, but I didn't change anything on the covering other than I added the white stripes on the bottom, the wing, and the horizontal stabilizer. The reason for the canopy coming off like it does, it's magnet. Got little clips in the front here, balsa wood clips that clip under these 2 balsa wood strips here, and 2 magnets in the canopy and in the plane. But the reason I made this canopy, box it in like this with a false floor, made it removable, was so I could access the pull-pull control setup if I need to do any maintenance on it. Now that I have it apart, we can take a look at these incredibly small micro RC components. This is the micro RC brick. You can see it spec'd right on the board. The ESC, 5 amp 1S ESC. There are the two onboard digital linear servos. These are extensions I ordered, custom extensions. Plugs into the boards. That's for the aileron servos. They are the JST SH plugs. Here's the antenna. It's beautiful, small, soft silicon wires going up to the brushless motor. They say this is a drone motor, high quality. Happy Models is the brand sold by Buzzard RC. So it's 6400 kV, give enough RPM on 1S, but when you look at the size of the motor, it's incredibly small for the power output. I have the prop adapter adapting from a 1.5 millimeter shaft to a 4 millimeter bore in the GWS style plastic electric props. So this is a 5x3 prop I'm going to start off with. I also have that in the 6x3. This is the lead to the battery. Again, really small, soft silicon wires. It's beautiful components. So that is the receiver, and it's mounted with the 3M double-sided tape because it has the 3 gyro system on it. So it has high sensitivity, low sensitivity, and off. So I got this micro receiver brick in the DSMX2 protocol. So I have it bound to my Spectrum DX9 transmitter. So amazing technology that you can do that nowadays. So let's take a look at the overall setup and the challenges that were involved putting this micro RC components in a plane this size. I have a extension built to mount the motor, also doubles as a platform to mount the micro brick receiver that's screwed into the firewall. I have it like tongue and groove into the motor mount, and also I got a tongue going into this plate screwed into the firewall. This is all 32nd plywood with a piece of 32nd plywood backing behind the balsa firewall on the model. The servos mounted on the micro brick receiver have to be up here so that the leads can reach to the motor, but my control surfaces are way back there. What I have is the 20 thou carbon fiber rods and the 20 thou wire that is super glued to the rods with the heat shrink tubing around it and super glued. That gets me attached to the servo. I have heat shrink guides right in here for the carbon fiber rods. They're running through the firewall back through the fuselage. They cross over for the way I have the controls set up. And I have the pull-pull system. So I am converting linear motion to this pull-pull system which is a rotating motion. So all this I custom fabricated. I have a piece of 64th plywood, top and bottom. 2 stringers were going across here that you'd mount your normal micro servos on. So I put a plate top and bottom. And I have 2 small pieces of aluminum tubing going through the plate. So the separation of the plate spaced on either side of the balsa wood cross members with the aluminum tubing going through, that supports the pivot action on these arms here with a little piece of plywood spacer cut out and glued to it. Similar setup to my rubber powered RC conversion. The spring action of the carbon fiber rods coming through this, which was the dashboard of the model, is the only thing holding these in. So I needed everything to rotate freely, not bind. So these are 32nd plywood arms that I made. And I have the 6-pound spider wire. Drilled the holes in the plywood arms, run the spider wire through a piece of heat shrink tubing, and super glued is how that is all set up. The spider wire goes through a common tube, rudder, and elevator. The rudder comes out the bottom. The elevator comes out the side. So pull system going to these little plywood control horns that came with the kit, and heat shrink tubing and super glued together so it doesn't slip. So that's the setup that gets me from digital linear servos back to arms operating the pull system back to the tail surfaces. Took a little bit of figuring to get all that set up. Very lightweight system. Everything operates nice and free. So took a bit of figuring to get the rudder elevator set up with this micro RC brick and everything on board and up front here. Next, I had to figure how to get my ailerons working, and I went back on the Buzzard Models website, and they had these, you could order these custom servo extensions. So these are, again, beautiful lightweight wiring. Got them to custom build me 5-inch extensions with the JST SH plugs, and that let me mount my digital linear servos on the wing. So that's all the longer the leads were on the servos. That wasn't getting me up front to the micro brick receiver. This is Bill Stevens' setup. Came with the kit. We have the ailerons with the little thin nylon glue-in hinges with, I think it's about 35 thou wire horns, control horns or arms that go into the ailerons. And I added plywood plates here and here. I wanted a smaller hole, and I wanted less slop with these arms coming into here. He recommended just an arm coming back, this arm coming up, and heat shrink tubing, and super glue the tubing to the arms, to the rods and these arms, and the heat shrink tubing would flex. I went with the 90-degree bends and simply heated up this piece of heat shrink, flattened it with my fingers, drilled a hole through it, super glued it to these control horns here, and I have the same carbon fiber rods, 20 thou carbon fiber rods, the 20 thou wire 90-degree bends going through the heat shrink tubing, and glued to the carbon fiber rods up front, just like I have for the rudder and elevator. I got the Z bends to make your neutral adjustments. So there's my individual servo setup for the ailerons, and I just had to pick that wing style in my programming on my DX9. On all the servos, after the Z bend, I am just doing a 90-degree bend through the digital linear servo, and these keepers are nothing more than little pieces of the insulation I pulled off of some small wiring. It just has a snug fit. They're just pressed onto the wire, like the 90-degree bends, and up here on the Z bends and going through the servos. Let's take another look at the canopy. Traditionally, you would glue the canopy onto the plane, but as I said, I wanted to be able to access my pull system. I also couldn't just glue the canopy on and have them exposed, so the false floor idea. What I did with that is everything that you see that's black, it's balsa wood. I framed it up in this opening, so the sides, the false floor, the back, and the dash, and glued it all together. Then I painted it just flat black, and the canopy is mostly glued on both these sides here. And if you don't know about this way of doing it, take balsa lock, which you normally would brush on your frame to put covering down, like light span covering. Brush it on the frame, let it dry, and then it's heat activated. You can also use it to attach canopies, and it works really well because it turns clear. So I brushed it on the sides here and then used the iron, and that's how the canopy is mostly held on. I also brushed a little more around the back and the front here, but didn't stop there. I did some screenshots on my phone, uploaded those files, and printed the dashboard on my computer and the pilot figure. So that's Matt Chapman, the aerobatic and air show pilot that flies a cap. So a little tribute pilot I have in here. So I just took his picture and mirror imaged it, printed it, and then I just have tape, packing tape, on both sides of the pilot with a slot cut in here. So the packing tape stiffens it up, dropped them in the slot, glued them in, printed the dash, cut it out, put packing tape on both sides of that, and used some of the Yoo-hoo glue to glue the dash in the panel, the photo of the dash, glued that in. So there's my buddy Matt Chapman flying a cap. I believe he's might be one of the only pilots in the U.S. that flies a cap. Even though this isn't his plane, he had to go in a cap. This is a bolt-on wing I have set up here. So 2 little tiny nylon screws. So I have 2 little nylon nuts glued in behind here for the wing bolts. And the wing has two dowels in the front with the two holes in the back, and the dowels engage in the fuselage right here. These are balsa wood wheel pants. Zach also built them, glued the layers together, shaped them, sanded them, and painted them. He also bent the wiring up for the axles and whipped them with thread and super glue, attached them to the carbon fiber landing gear legs. I made these plywood straps and mounted the wheel pants to the landing gear. Here's a modification I did to the landing gear. I made them so they plug in. The way I did that was I filed these flats on the ends of the carbon fiber rods. Then I glued a piece of heat shrink tubing in the bottom side and a piece in the top side. And on the top ones, I formed them around these flats on the carbon fiber rods, so that clocks the landing gear when the flat on this rod, slide them into the heat shrink tubing. I've got stops glued on the carbon fiber rods, and you simply slide them in and push them up against the stop, and then the heat shrink tubing on top with the flats on the carbon fiber rods locate the alignment for the wheels. The stops for the landing gear are also heat shrink tubing, and they are super glued on this end only. The tail wheel is steerable. This is 20 thousandths music wire. The bracket is made from 3 pieces of 32nd ply. This bend coming through the bracket carries the weight of the tail. This section here connected to the rudder makes it steerable. The wheel itself is made from a 1/8 inch piece of ply sanded round, and the tire is about 4 or 5 layers of heat shrink tubing. I have a hole cut in the bottom for cooling electronics. A bit of white paint dresses up the screws for the cowling. Did a little bit of lettering on the rudder and the wing. Have the plane back together, and one more thing to share with you. This breakaway O-ring setup for the prop is no doubt a fine setup, but it's not very scale. Here's what I came up with. This is a one-off fiberglass and balsa wood nose cone. So I laminated several layers of balsa wood in this front part here. Initially I had a smaller hole in here and a metal piece of rod sticking out about so far. Reason for that was I chucked that up in my drill, sanded the balsa wood to shape, then I glued a piece of foam on here and chucked on that rod hanging out back here farther, sanded the foam to shape, and then I laid the fiberglass, 3 layers of 1 3/4 ounce fiberglass over the balsa wood and the foam to make this skirt. Peeled the foam out of there, pulled the metal rod out, drilled it out for this wooden dowel, and for the finish on here I used a coating of epoxy with white microbloons for just a final coating to give it the color. So this simply fits into the bore on the 4mm bore, just a press fit on these GWS props, and then the skirt covers the prop, the O-ring setup, breakaway O-ring setup, and comes far enough back where it gives me a nice gap to the cowling. In the never-ending quest to keep things light, I had no choice but to mount the batteries on the outside, not putting batteries on the inside and putting a switch in the system. That wire harness would add too much weight. So we simply Velcro the battery on the bottom here. Got the plug hanging out back of the cowling. Turn on, we just plug the battery in. Here's the tail of the tape. All up weight, scale, full house, 4-channel, electric, cap 232, coming in at 3.6 ounces. Let's fire it up, shall we? Throttle cut on. Three flight modes. Here's with the high sensitivity gyros. Making corrections for movement. Low sensitivity off. And throttle cut on. Amazing. Stunner. Throttle cut on. Unbelievable. Micro cap 232. Stevens Aeromodel. Gotta love it.